Questo acceso. Okay, good morning. Good morning, everybody. We can start our conference. First of all, I would like to give you a warm welcome to all of you, to my university, Catholic University in Brescia, in which we have this conference that I think would be very interesting and fruitful. As you know, this conference makes part of the dissemination activities of our cost action, but we have also some participants that are not members of our cost action. So I would like only to say something for these people in order to make them familiar to our cost action. It is a very good, important, I think, innovative and very fruitful network and a place in which we produce a lot of research documents and thoughts. The action involves 27 countries and is multidisciplinary in nature. The group consists of pedagogists, sociologists, agricultural experts, and so on, economists. I don't want to forget someone, but it's a very huge group of expertise. And we are all professionals who share the goal of better understanding the NEET phenomenon and more in general, young people in rural setting, not only for the knowledge, the understanding of these people, but in order to promote also some practical intervention to give some orientation to the policymaker and policy decisioner. The work of the cost action revolves around the 5 thematic groups who address the following themes: social network and social inclusion, formal and non-formal education, employment services and employment in rural areas, sustainability from the natural, social and economic point of view, and the construction of a meta model of risk and protective factors according to the meta model of the reference of the action, so the biosocioecological model. Our work aims to contribute to define a coherent model for the future research, but also intervention, based on the intensive survey of national and cross-national trends regarding rural needs. And as you can see in our website, for those who are not familiar with our cost action, we have several research reports in our website, some webinars, some other materials that are freely available. So please visit our website because one of our aim is to disseminate what we produced, materials, webinars, everything. The end of cost action will result in the implementation of an online observatory, a platform that will allow us to maintain our network, but also to involve some other people that want to work with us, stakeholders, politics, policy decision maker. Today's event represents the first international conference, and we are honored, and it's a great pleasure for us to host this conference in Brescia. And the idea is to discuss what we did, to discuss the result of our research, create and enhancement, reinforce our network. As you can see in the program, we have really a lot of presentation in plenary session and also in the parallel sessions. And I really hope that this day with us in Brescia could be fruitful from the different point of view, from the research, the practical, and also for the relationship point of view. Only this, I don't know if Francisco wants to add something else. Francisco, that is our coordinator. If not, I now give the floor to the legitimate host of this campus, Dr. Giovanni Panzeri, that is the director of our campus in Brescia. Thank you, Giovanni.
Thank you, Elena. Welcome here in Brescia. Welcome to all the persons present here and all to those connected through internet. My name, as Marta said, is Giovanni Panzeri, and I am the director of the Brescia campus, a campus which is active in Brescia since 1965, which means that in not a very long time we will celebrate our 60 years of activity here. We are part of the larger reality of the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart, which was established 101 years ago in Milano. I'm pleased to have you here in Brescia today and tomorrow, and with this public meeting, which is dedicated to rural youth and the new youth guarantee. A theme that is quite relevant, quite important. I was surprised yesterday in reading this article wrote in a quite brilliant way by Daniela Marzana, our researcher in psychology, and published by the Giornale di Brescia. I was surprised, negatively surprised, in understanding that only in Italy, NEETs are 2.1 million, which is a terrific number, that this number is increasing year by year, and that there is a problem in particular on female population, which reaches the 25% of incidence on total female population. So the argument is important, and it's quite correct that so many professors and experts join here in Brescia today and discuss about it. Let me thank you, all the persons who have worked in these months for organizing this. I believe Francisco and Elena, Marta, as well as let me thank you, all the persons which will take part to the different session, discussion, debates. It's impossible to say their names one by one. It will take 1 hour, more or less, but thank you, really thank you very much. The theme related to the future of young generation in the field of work and social participation, with this specific focus on rural context, is both important for Italy and I believe for many countries in Europe. And it's a theme which has to be studied also with the objective to think about new policies for helping these needs to change their condition and have a different approach to their life. This is a theme quite relevant on a social viewpoint. And this work today and tomorrow here will be particularly important, not only for young generations, but also for the entire society, for political institutions. And of course, among institutions, there are the universities. Universities which actively work with and in favor of young people and with the aim of educate professionals who will work in next year with and in favor of young generations. There are other 3 factors important for today's and tomorrow meeting, which I discussed with Elena, Marta, and it seems important to underline. Interdisciplinarity. Elena said so many fields of studies that because the fields of study interested in the phenomenon of nature is so wide. An international view. Today we have people coming from 14 countries, more or less. And in these 2 days, you will share also your knowledge of the practical implication for policymakers and decision makers. That's all. That's all. I won't be able to stay here because I will have so many other boring activities to perform in my role. But I'm very glad of having you here, and I wish you a good staying here in Brescia, in our university, and in this town, which is quite beautiful. I saw your program. You will have also some relax time in Brescia downtown, and I'm sure that you will appreciate. Good day to everybody, and I pass the microphone to Elena. Ciao.
Professor Alessandro Antonietti, that is the Dean of my faculty, the Faculty of Psychology. Thank you, Alessandro.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to take part to this opening session. I would like to stress what this meeting means for the faculty. The faculty has a campus in Milan, and in the last years, also this campus in Brescia was opened for the Faculty of Psychology. And this meeting, as far as I understood, is one of the outcomes of this long-lasting investment of the Faculty of Psychology in the campus of Brescia. And this outcome is produced by two kinds of interactions. Mainly my colleague Elena Marta, who was in charge of developing the faculty here in Brescia, of the actions we devised in the last years. On the one hand, there was an investment in interacting with the local community. And this was important in order to understand what here in Brescia and in the surroundings psychologists can do. But on the other hand, there was also an investment in the international perspective. It may be that these two kinds of investments move into opposite directions, but indeed they are strongly interconnected. Since problems at the local level cannot be understood and possibly solved without an international perspective. Solutions, concepts, tools in order to address local problems are suggested, can be found if we have a broad view and if we have in our mind what in other countries, what colleagues working in other fields can suggest. But also on the opposite side, in order to promote, to develop conceptual perspectives, we have also to be aware of what locally people need. And so the two investments in these two directions are both fruitful. And I understood that in this meeting, both these two perspectives will be taken into account. And this is why I am very grateful to my colleague Elena Marta for the commitment he developed in these years in order not only to place psychology in Brescia. This is not so important to deliver courses in another campus. What is important is to build a network around a course, around a series of courses. Indeed, since we are offered both bachelor and master courses here in campus. And the success of this meeting is a proof that this long-lasting work produced some valid outcomes. So have a nice day here in our university, spend a nice time in this beautiful town, and many greetings, and I have also a fruitful work to be developed in this day. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. And now I'm giving the floor to Pirkko Pyörälä. Pirkko, can you hear me? Thank you so much. European Commission, DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. On all course sections members' behalf, I'd like to thank you for being here today. I imagine you have a lot of tasks, a lot of duties, and you are here with us. And so really, thank you so much, please.
Hello, thank you, for the introduction, and good morning from my side. Can you hear me?
Yes.
In the room. Okay, great. Good morning from my side, and thank you for the invitation to this conference. My name is Pirkko Pyörälä, and I work on youth employment policies at the European Commission, Directorate General for Employment. And indeed, the theme of this network and this conference is very, very important for the Commission as well. Young people, and especially NEET, they need special attention, and you are all aware of this. We know how much indeed the Commission cares for young people. You might know that this morning our President Ursula von der Leyen gave a State of the Union speech, and you might remember that exactly a year ago she announced the new ALMA initiative. ALMA is an initiative for the disadvantaged young people, to give them opportunities to be integrated through a mobility program abroad, to be integrated into their societies and into their home regions. And this initiative is now taking shape. It has taken a few months to prepare, but the first mobilities are starting in a few months. So this is one way of helping young people further. But and the reason for this support is that we know that young people, if they face in unemployment early on, or if they become inactive, it has long-standing consequences for themselves and for the society. They have an increased risk of staying unemployed for a long time, also when they're adults. It will reduce their future earnings and produce individual hardship. And all this generates direct and indirect costs for the society, of course. We know also that poverty can be transmitted very easily from generation to generation. And above all, it's a loss of human capital. These young people, we need them in the society. And the NEET phenomenon is a way to address regional differences as well, because we know that there are regions where the NEET phenomenon is more important than in certain other regions. And indeed, there are lots of differences between EU member states, but also between regions. Overall, the NEET rate in 2021 was 13.1 in the whole EU. And we in the EU have the aim of reducing the NEET rate to 9% by 2030. There are already a few member states which have reached the 9% target: Netherlands, Sweden, Slovenia, Denmark, and Luxembourg. Also Iceland and Norway, which are not in the EU, but with whom we work very closely with, have reached this target. But then there are countries where the NEET rate is over 20, such as in Italy and Romania. And which we just heard about the Italian numbers even, which are impressive indeed. But then these are averages at EU, at country level, but then there are differences when you look more closely into different regions. Not always a uniform urban-rural divide, because in some countries the NEET problem is more severe in urban areas, such as in the Netherlands, Austria, Belgium, for instance. So what can we do to tackle this this phenomenon? So what we have is a youth guarantee, which was reinforced into 2020. So we now call it reinforced youth guarantee. So it can be used to tackle the NEET phenomenon, and also to tackle regional inequalities. A few words about the Youth Guarantee for those who don't know this tool. It is a council recommendation which was adopted first in 2013. And the aim is to offer a young person a job, education, traineeship or apprenticeship within 4 months of the young person becoming unemployed or leaving education. 4 months is because we want to privilege rapid intervention so that we try to avoid long-term inactivity. Initially, the age limit to Youth Guarantee was 25, but in 2020, when we reinforced, one of the things was that we extended the age limit until the young person reaches 30. We know that that young people need help longer, and this phenomenon has increased over the past years. But how then can the Youth Guarantee be used to support rural areas which suffer from high NEET rates? So we highlight the fact that the Youth Guarantee allows developing regional or local solutions so that we prevent young people from leaving because they have to seek opportunities elsewhere. We want them to have the choice to stay in their home regions. The reinforced Youth Guarantee places particular attention to individualized action plans, which is based on profiling both the young individual, preparing the offer, and also profiling the services or mapping the services available. We have to be aware indeed of the services which we can offer the young person, and we have to keep in mind that maybe not all the essential services are present for the young person in his or her own region. So we need to see how to offer, for instance, social services, employment services, education, training, support in the place where the young people is. And in rural areas, we have seen that it's sometimes necessary to complement the existing offer. And we have seen also that many member states also already do this. For instance, in Bulgaria, they have created specific mobile teams which go to places where some services are lacking. We have seen in Galicia, in Spain, mobile information booths also traveling around. And in Finland, there is a network of some 60 one-stop shops, which are scattered around the country so that every young person can find one of these one-stop shops in the region nearby. And these one-stop shops gather different services under one roof. Also, specific youth self-employment or startup support can be interesting to young people in rural areas. As for employment perspectives, national skills forecasts and available local skills forecasts could identify the demand on the labor market. And this has to place particular attention to regional specificities and regional barriers which young people face. For instance, there could be initiatives which bring together employment opportunities and training opportunities in one region, specializing on the offer which is interesting for the region. We a few years ago, we funded, for instance, a project in Greece, which is focusing on on blue economy. And this project brought together employment offers which were present in the region, like tourism, offshore wind economy, shipbuilding, and they constructed specific trainings to the needs of these local enterprises in these areas. As for funding, of course, we expect the member states to find national funding for this phenomenon, which is really an important also for them. But the EU can offer substantial support to complement the national funding. We have the European Social Fund Plus, which is the main tool to finance the youth guarantee. But in addition, under the Next Generation EU Recovery Instrument, we have especially the Recovery and Resilience Facility and REACT EU that have substantial amounts available for member states. But then for rural regions, we have specific resources available through the Common Agricultural Policy, the InvestEU program, the Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund, as well as the Erasmus Plus program. I wish you a successful conference, and I look forward to the conclusions of your discussions today. And thank you very much.
Thank you for your time and for your words. Thank you so much, Pirkko. And now I think we can start with the first session. So I invite here Claudia, that is the chair of our first plenary session. Francisco, do you want to say something? Are you sure? Okay. Have a good, fruitful day. And please, Claudia. So people at home can see.
Yes, don't worry. We have to.
Yes, I think
Okay,
it's
so
okay.
now that will go. No, okay.
So I think we have more than 1 hour to discuss about new policies for young people in the aftermath of new youth guarantee. So what is not open? Okay. Yes, perfect. I saw Heidi's face. That something is wrong, and I was wondering what happened. Okay, so the title of our session will be EU Policies for Young People in the Aftermath of Youth Guarantee, New Youth Guarantee. And we will have two people to discuss about this. One is Niall O'Higgins. I hope I pronounced correct. And the second one is James Hermanson. Niall is is senior researcher at the International Labour Organization in the Employment Analysis Unit and professor of economics at the University of Salerno. He has a huge research on youth issue, and his main research interests cover various aspects of labor and experimental economics. His latest publications include an edited volume on internship, employability, and the search for decent work experience, a book on youth employment policy entitled Rising the Youth Employment Challenge, New Evidence on Key Policy Issues, and a lot of other scientific articles in well-quoted journals. So Niles, I think your presentation We'll explore how youth unemployment is expected to evolve in the context of dual transition, the current economic trends, and the international challenges, like we have now the war in Ukraine, and how the policies can respond to these challenges in the near future.
Good.
So I think the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claudia. 1 in 4 young people, that is almost 300 million young people in the world today, are neither in employment, education, or training. Hi, it's good to be here. It's good to be in a face-to-face meetings. First face-to-face conference I participated in since before the COVID pandemic. I'm going to present quite a broad picture, and based on one of the publications that was not mentioned, that because it's just came out after I wrote my bio. In August, the ILO published its biennial, the latest edition of its biennial Global Employment Trends for Youth 2022 edition, and that looks at broad trends in youth labor markets and particularly the impact of COVID. It also outlines some potential areas where job creation, investment in job creation may be usefully provide decent work for young people, and it looks a bit at some areas of that, and most of my remarks about the policy response are going to be about that, a sort of longer term view, and particularly in the digital economy. But anyway, we'll get there. So I'll talk first a little bit about youth labor markets and COVID. And then, as I say, I'm going to focus my policy related remarks on really about creating jobs in various areas, and particularly in the digital economy, and the issues that raises. I'll end with some concluding remarks. So, an overview. Well, we're talking about NEET, right? And globally, for me, I'm really glad we started a few years ago to start to shift focus away from young unemployed people per se towards young needs. Of course, needs include most of the young unemployed who are not in education. So first of all, needs are a lot more people than just the youth unemployed. Actually, globally, youth unemployment is around 75 million, probably a bit less this year, but we don't have full estimates for that yet. But that's about somewhere in the region of 6% of young people. Whereas young needs, over 280 million globally. That means, or as I said, 1 in 4. And if you have the good fortune of being a young woman, that's 1 in 3 of you are going to be need. And the implication here that's the sort of hidden here is that because needs are more or less, a bit more complicated than that, unemployed plus inactive young people who are not in education, the vast bulk of needs globally, at least, less so in the EU, but globally, are inactive. That is outside the labour force, and that is an important issue also in the EU. Needs vary greatly by region, but they're almost always higher amongst young women. Here it looks like Northern, Southern, and Western Europe, the female need rate is a bit lower, but actually if you look at up to 29-year-olds, so also in Europe, and certainly in the EU 27 countries, there are more young female needs than young male needs. But in some regions, there is this huge disparity, and that's a concern, particularly for us in the ILO. One reason for that is that young women face additional barriers to participating in the labour market, which have to do with sort of structural barriers, social norms. Also, I mean, some practical barriers, like they tend to have more care responsibilities and so on. There's a series of reasons why that's the case. I'm not going to go into that, but the other point I wanted to make initially was that NEET is concentrated amongst the least educated, and this is particularly the case in high-income countries, less so in low-income countries, but really in high-income countries, NEET rates are much, much higher. You see, in high-income countries, 70% of, well, in this case, 25 to 29-year-olds. I'm not going to go into why I select that age group. It's basically to not not confuse things by having educational age in there. But anyway, large, it's very, very disproportionate, and those particularly in high income countries. So what about COVID and COVID-19 and young people? Well, the economic impact of COVID-19 has been, well, I think the most relevant point here is it's been more global than actually the global economic financial crisis. I mean, its impact on GDP was far more widespread, far more equal, far more democratic in its impact on countries. If you look at the left, that's the impact on GDP of the global economic financial crisis, and on the right is COVID. We don't know, actually. I mean, with Ukraine and the conflict in Ukraine and various other things going on, the IMF is constantly revising down the GDP growth, and I guess OECD too. We use IMF. Anyway, that's to be seen. I'll come back to that. But anyway, so there was a big impact on employment, but the employment impact was much bigger, despite the sort of fairly equal GDP impact. The impact on employment was much bigger in lower income countries, so low and middle income countries respectively. EU did pretty well. There wasn't a big impact, but in high income countries, there was this massive fiscal inputs, fiscal response, which attenuated a lot of the initial impact, and recovery is also going pretty well, particularly in EU countries. That's the blue line at the top. If we look at young versus adults, well, the situation is slightly different. Young people very, very hard hit, also in EU countries, relative to adults, but also here the response has been pretty good in EU countries, much slower in the rest of the world. One of the consequences of this is that NEET rates, I think, increased to over 23%, which essentially reversed. I mean, NEET rates, since we started measuring them in 2005, have been gradually decreasing, and as has the difference between male and female NEET rates. That was reversed, or at least the downward trend in NEET rates was reversed by 1 year. All the progress made since 2005 was removed. If we look at the EU did, as I said, did pretty well, relatively speaking. But, and by the end of 2021, so remains to be seen what happens now, but by the end of 2021, NEET rates had returned pretty much to their pre-COVID levels, but with a different composition. So if we split NEET into NEET inactive and NEET unemployed, we see that actually the unemployed part of NEET, the percentage of young people who are unemployed, this is a share of the population, has actually fell over the crisis period, whereas the percentage of the inactive of the youth actually increased. So the overall NEET rate stayed pretty much the same, so they recovered, but actually NEET inactive increased. This is up to 29 years old, I have to say. So there's some difference in the thing, but and that is an issue of concern, the NEET inactive. One thing one further point to make on this is that all this has had a big toll on young people's mental well-being, much more so for young people than older people, old codgers like myself. And if we look to the left, we can see that, yeah, quite clearly, the picture before COVID, or the beginning of COVID, was much more equally, the risk of depression by age was much more equally spread over age groups. Young people, the risk of depression has gone up much more than older people in the meantime. And this was clearly most pronounced amongst young NEETs. So the risk of depression and the risk of feelings of social exclusion much higher amongst young NEETs than they are amongst other young people. So NEET brings with it, the implication being that NEET, well, not causal, but NEET brings with it the likelihood, the damaging effects also on mental well-being, which feeds into this scarring that was mentioned before, that makes it that much harder to get young people into the labor market. Okay, so young people initially suffered much bigger falls in employment than adults. This was more so than even more so pretty much, but a bit more so than in previous big recessions. To add it to this, there were also interruptions to education and training, which should be mentioned. So young people really were hit hard by the COVID-19. One issue of concern is that this reduced youth employment translated much more into increased inactivity and NEET, rather than increased unemployment per se. And we saw that was the case also in, particularly in terms of the recovery in the EU. And this emphasizes the need for greater outreach measures. The 2020 relaunched new and improved youth guarantee did a lot. There was an explicit emphasis on outreach, and I guess we hope to see the benefits, because this is clearly recognized that between 2013 and 2019, the youth guarantee was really effective in bringing down youth unemployment rates, but it didn't do much to budge the NEET inactives over the period, which remained pretty much constant. And we've seen that, if anything, it seems to be getting worse, the NEET inactive group. And then there's the issue of young people's mental well-being, and that was especially severely affected. What about recovery? Began in the second half of 2020. It was often weaker amongst young people, not so much in the EU, and is very different across countries. Much dependent on the policy response, as I already said, pretty much. And we have to see now what's going to happen, particularly in Europe, with the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, which is obviously going to impact and lead to a new, it is already leading to the danger of recession again, renewed recession. Recovery of youth labour markets was relatively strong in the EU. I would argue that has a lot to do with the youth guarantee. It has to do also with the remedial measures, but the remedial measures introduced were much more, it did much more for adults than for young people. But I think the youth guarantee in the EU played an important role. But there's a danger that the short-term job opportunity losses for those people hit by the crisis can turn into long-term exclusion, long-term scarring, as the phrase is these days, and long-term exclusion of young people from the labour market. So we need to improve outreach measures, and clearly that's a focus of the youth guarantee these days. And what will be the focus of my second part of my presentation, we need to create more good quality job opportunities for young people. So that's what I'm largely going to be talking about in a minute or two. There are some additional challenges that COVID really served to emphasize. There was a reinforcement of the pre-existing trend towards more flexible, but clearly less secure forms of employment, particularly with the digitalization of employment. I'll talk about that. That's a bit more complex. But there are also some positives there in terms of the possibilities, and the tracking project is certainly looking at this in terms of the possibilities that digitalization of employment services provides to improve services. As I mentioned, there's much evidence that COVID-19 had an especially severe consequences for young people's mental well-being. But what we're also seeing is increasing inequalities among the youth market. There's a real danger of some groups of the less advantaged young people getting left behind. But I guess the bottom line for me is that what I'm perceiving is that there's a growth. I think it was already happening with the growth of temporary employment forms and so on, but there's the COVID-19 and now the conflict in Ukraine, it increases uncertainty. It really increases uncertainty in young people entering the labor market today. And I think that's a real issue. Okay, so turning now quickly to creating job opportunities for young people. In the Global Employment Trends for Youth, we looked at various areas where job opportunities might be created, and we ran a macroeconometric model with lots and lots of equations, looking at some specific, the employment effects of specific investments in various areas. So generally we looked at the situation in green and blue, so environmental related jobs or improving environmental quality of jobs, in digital and creative industries, and also in the care economy. The macroeconometric exercise was concerned with digital, green and care sector. And I'm going to talk mainly about digital, but overall, we estimate that relatively moderate investments in digital care and green will produce substantial, moderate but substantial gains in terms of, we estimate 32 million jobs for young people by 2030, about, and much more than over 100 million for overall 140 million, sorry, jobs overall, of which 32 million go to young people, and a boost GDP by 4.2%. Now, this is across the economy as a whole. This is a big number crunching exercises with the whole economy, so it deals with feed on. So it's not just in these three economies, if you like. The costs are pretty moderate, particularly the digital investment. So what we looked at specifically with the digital is the extending to universal broadband coverage. And that's a pretty moderate cost, less than 0.1%, around 1.1% of GDP, which for the digital side, moderate 6.5 million jobs will be created. Initially would be created mainly in Africa and Asia and the Pacific, where broadband access is more of an issue, where there's less universal, and much less so in Europe and Central Asia. But it's more evenly spread as we go forward, as the linkages feed into across countries. But all of for all of the employment gains, these are much more for young men than young women, given the existing gender structure of employment. So most of the gains go to young men. So we looked more generally at the digital economy, and what do we mean by the digital economy? I'm not going to go into great details. Here we took the OECD approach, or an OECD approach, in that we defined sectors. Digitalization is affecting all sectors of economic activity. And we define, we cut up the economy into highly, medium and low digital intensity activities. And we define the digital economy as those characterized by high digital intensity. And we looked at the quality of work and some other issues to do with that. So digitalization affecting, well, pretty much all industries to a greater or lesser extent, but it does so differently by age, sex, and country income. Particularly with regard to country income, the top quality jobs which one finds in communications, finance, and professional, that's kind of the hardcore ICT, but also banking and finance sectors, are much more developed. There's much more youth employment in high-income countries than in low and middle-income countries. Also, of course, digital economy is bigger. There's more youth employment in digital economy in high-income countries per se. And increasingly, the digital economy is dominated by high-skilled youth employment, especially in high-income countries. So that's the top line there. And that dominance, that high-skilled youth employment is growing very fast in high-income countries. It's growing much less fast. It's lower and growing less fast in low and middle-income countries. But having said that, overall, job quality, and despite what one might think in terms of sort of when one thinks of gig economy and crowd work and so on, job quality is pretty high in the digital economy. Okay, also because it tends to be high skilled, particularly in high-income countries, but it's also growing fast. It's growing much faster. Quality in terms of measured here in a very broad brush way in terms of the percentage of employment, permanent employment, is growing much faster in low and middle income countries. So that's a pretty encouraging sign in terms of development of the digital economy. There are some caveats, right? In order to take advantage of this high skilled, good quality employment, you need educational attainment. And there are some issues, particularly in low and middle income countries. This is a very complex graph, which maybe I shouldn't put up, but I wanted to emphasize the point that the education attainment is pretty much a condition for obtaining these good quality jobs. And the differences, let's say inequalities within the digital economy that one observes in terms of the quality of work is tends to be higher in lower middle income countries than it is in high income countries. So there are issues, let's say, of inequality within the digital economy, which are more pronounced in lower income countries. Then there's a platform economy. I don't have much time left, but okay, so just to say that young people are particularly suited to online and to some extent other forms of gig work, and they do have some relative advantages, particularly in low middle income countries, given the alternative forms of employment. So young workers actually, in analysis we've done of crowd workers, that is online gig work, if you like, we find that they are actually on higher wage rates than their older counterparts. And this is clearly attributable to their fast returns on experience, which is what the picture on the right shows. And as I say, particularly attractive to young people in lower income countries. There are some issues there, and particularly there's the issue of job security. Now, however, if you look at lower middle income countries, or you ask young people in lower middle income countries, what do you think about, you know, this online work and so on? They say it's great, it's great, because the alternative very often is informal employment with no job security. So, but there are issues, particularly in high income countries, to do with job security, to do with access to basic standards of work, the thing that my organization is primarily concerned with, which remain. However, having said that, the young people are, let's say, are more adapted to this kind of work than some others. So overall, COVID-19 has reinforced the trend towards digitalization. Digital economy offers significant opportunities for young people, and on average, the conditions of work in the digital economy are pretty damn good. But it's not open to all. There are conditions for access. It's mainly characterized by high-skilled employment. You need a certain level of educational attainment. You need also internet access, which is really an issue in Africa and some parts of Asia and the Pacific, not so much in Europe, I would say. Also, digital employment means less secure jobs, which has also become more accentuated during the pandemic. So in terms of the policy response, there's actions needed to ensure that these benefits are not just reaped by a lucky few. So the benefits of the digital economy, investments in the digital economy, are not just reaped by those already relatively well off, really fortunate in the labour market. Some final thoughts then, and I'll stop. Young people's labour market entry, yes, today is increasingly characterized by uncertainty and a longer duration of the school to work transition. This, I think, is a significant issue, and is becoming all the more acute with COVID and now with Ukraine. They've been particularly hard hit by the pandemic in terms of the economic recession, which again also increased uncertainty, as did the conflicts. This is especially true of some groups of more vulnerable young people caught up in the height of the recession. So there's a need to create good job opportunities. One area, digital economy, is promising, but there remain issues of job quality and inequalities of access in particular. It's important that job creation, and the bottom line here is that we don't want job creation to drive inequalities in youth labour markets. And with that, I'll end. I'll just leave it. We've got quite a lot of literature on that. I would recommend you go and you rush out or you connect up to the internet and you download. It is free. Thank you.
Thank you, Niall, for your presentation. It was a very useful overview of NEET issues in European Union and not only in European Union. If you have some questions, I think we can have 10 minutes for questions, comments. Okay, Maria.
You brought this part of the presentation about the global labor market. And my question is the problem of the criteria of capturing statistically speaking the needs in the world. Because we know there are some countries that have a huge amount of the non-formal economy, where the jobs are not formally captured in a specific way. So I wonder how can we make some comparisons among the countries when the type of economies and job labor is completely different. And NEET is the indicator that needs formal economy criteria.
Okay, thank you. Can
Yes.
you hear me? Yeah, so in principle, I mean, we use exclusively survey-based information. So in principle, formal employment is employment, so long as it's paid. There's complication there, but yeah, in principle, this is not a major issue. What is more of an issue, what is possibly an issue now, the ILO is just nearly 10 years ago, it redefined the International Conference of Labour Statisticians, which sets up the international standards on how things should be measured, labour market indicators should be measured, redefined work and employment. So in particular, employment should be paid. So this excludes a big chunk of employment in low income countries in particular, but low and middle income countries. It includes unpaid employment. So that includes contributing family workers, who are a big chunk amongst young people, a big chunk of informal employment. They are currently included as employed. I think, and this change has been implemented in some countries' labour force surveys, but in the global estimates that we produce, we don't yet take that into account. But that changes things because it shifts a big chunk of subsistence activities, contributing family workers, and so on. These kind of, by definition, informal activities. What was formerly employment, it remains work, but it is no longer employment. So these young people become NEET. The other thing I'd say about NEET, maybe more possibly of interest there, is that young NEETs, a big chunk of the young NEETs, particularly in South Asia and in Middle East and North Africa, where NEET rates amongst young women are highest, is the care work, so unpaid care work. Now, this is work, but not employment. And these people these young people, young women, practically, are defined as NEET. I think all things considered, it's not perfect measure, but there is comparability across country. And I think the point of including this group, I think, is a positive step. I think it's much, much better than youth unemployment. It's a much simpler criteria to apply, actually, than youth unemployment, which requires this active search for jobs, which in some countries, lower middle income countries, it's not particularly, you don't get jobs very often through searching for it. Someone comes and, they know you're on the look out for a job. I mean, there are much more informal mechanisms which don't. So anyway, I think the extension of NEET does a number of positive things, and it's actually much easier to apply across countries. There are problems with it, but the informal employment is not, I mean, it's no more than it is anywhere. I mean, informal employment, do people report the fact that they're working if I were informally employed and a guy from an official statistics guy came and knocked on my door and said, did you do any work for Pay a Profit last week? I'd say, oh, no way, no, of course not. And, but I mean, but in principle, it's included among as employment. It's defined as employment. So how well it's captured is another issue.
Thank you, Niall. Other questions? No, it's too early. Okay. Maybe after James' presentation, we will have more questions. Okay, so I think this part is new, almost new in our cost action regarding social economy. Yes, some of us already have worked on social economy, but the relation between social economy and youth employment and youth inclusion is is quite new also for us. So James will bring us this perspective of how social enterprises and how social economy could bring youth in the labor market or could help youth inclusion. Just few words about James. James is policy analyst with the Social Economy and Innovation Unit at Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Center for Entrepreneurship, Social Medium Enterprises, Regions and Cities. And he is one of the co-authors of the forthcoming OECD publication on youth-led social enterprises, and also as a lot of researches on legal frameworks for social enterprise and social economy. So, James, the floor is yours. Do you share the, is the presentation shared with the others? Yes, yes, yes. Yes, I don't know if it's on the, okay, perfect.
Can you hear me? So again, my name is James Hermanson, and I work with the Social Economy and Innovation Unit at the OECD. And first of all, I just want to thank you for the invitation to participate in this very timely conference here. It's an honor to share the stage. Sorry. Thank you. It's an honor to share the stage with Claudia and Niall today, and a pleasure to be in this beautiful city. And so again, today I'll speak to you about our ongoing research that we're conducting on youth-led social enterprises. And it's an exciting area that has a lot of relevance in the context of the many crises that we're currently facing, as well as the challenges we're discussing today related to youth employment and skills development. And so I guess I'll start with the bad news first, building on what Niall mentioned earlier. Young people today face amplified challenges compared to older age groups. In many OECD countries, they're the first generation to earn less income than previous cohorts at the same age and face spiraling costs of living, education, and housing prices. Relative to prior generations, they accumulate wealth more slowly and are less likely to own a home due to factors such as labor market volatility, the rising age of labor market entrances, and slower earnings growth. And these trends have been expressed in concerning ways. As you can see on the right of the screen, since the mid-1980s, the poverty rate of young people aged 18 to 25 increased from 10 to 16%, even as the poverty rates for elderly age groups fell during the same period. Across OECD countries, on average, almost 13.5% of 15 to 29-year-olds were classified as NEETs in 2020 following the COVID-19 crisis. Also, according to the ILO, the share of NEET youth worldwide rose to 23.3% in 2020, which was the highest level in 15 years. In April and May of 2021, youth unemployment across OECD countries reached 14% on average. And while these figures have since decreased in the aftermath of the pandemic to closer to 11% in June of this year, young people are still more likely to be underemployed, often subject to temporary contracts and precarious working conditions. This leaves them vulnerable to future economic shocks in the future, and also testifies to the need of initiatives such as the Youth Guarantee. And so, despite facing these very real challenges, what we've seen is that young people display notable and perhaps counterintuitive preferences to pursue careers oriented around entrepreneurship and positive social impacts. In general, we've seen that young people are more inclined to become entrepreneurs than older generations. And today, almost half of young people in OECD countries say they would prefer entrepreneurship compared to working as an employee. Similarly, over 40% of university students in OECD countries reported that they plan to become entrepreneurs within 5 years of graduating. We saw in the 2017 Global Shapers Survey that potentially over 40% of young people see a sense of purpose or impact on society as one of the most important criteria when considering job opportunities. Other studies indicate that 44% of millennials and 49% of Generation Z are making choices on the types of work and organizations they will work for based on the ethics that they display. And so I guess what we're seeing overall then, in summary, is that young people are turning to entrepreneurial careers where they can make a difference. And as you might guess, this is why we are interested in looking into youth-led social enterprises, which we think are well positioned to fulfill this need for youth to create a social impact while also providing a chance for meaningful employment. And so overall, we see this drive that in young people towards socially impactful entrepreneurship to present a sort of double or twin opportunity. Youth-led social enterprises have the potential to address pressing social and environmental issues, of which we have many, while dynamically engaging young people with opportunities in the labor market. And so really our research in this area has been to assess the extent of this opportunity, whether it's manifesting in reality, and identify areas where policymakers may want to act to support youth-led social enterprises. Already, young people are important members of the social economy. The social economy being somewhere between the private and public sector. It's comprised of associations, cooperatives, foundations, mutual organizations, and social enterprises, which we'll discuss today. And already the share of young people among employees in social enterprises is significant in many countries. We see about 18% in France and 13% in Italy, and even 26% of social economy employees in Brazil. Similarly, leadership in social enterprises varies significantly between countries and even regions. For example, in Scotland, they represent 2% of trustees and board members and 3% of CEOs of social enterprises, whereas 18% of social enterprise board members are 35 or younger in Quebec, Canada. In India, we see that 27% of social enterprises are actually led by young people between the ages of 18 and 34. And through our research, we had a great opportunity to look at existing youth-led social enterprises and dig into their impact. And there are already many examples of successful youth-led social enterprises existing today. Most notably in France, there's the Enercoup, which is a cooperative energy provider founded by a young social entrepreneur that provides 100% renewable energy to private households and businesses across the country. In Italy, not far away in Verona, Quid is a social enterprise that was founded in 2013 that produces ethical clothing from dead stock fabrics, which are fabrics that are recovered surplus ones that were not used by previous companies. They now employ 126 staff from disadvantaged backgrounds across 17 different towns in northern Italy. In Montreal, we saw there's two young social entrepreneurs that established a platform cooperative that uses blockchain technology to provide ride sharing and food delivery services. And despite being founded shortly before the COVID-19 pandemic, they grew to be the second most used ride hailing app in Quebec and are currently undergoing expansion. And finally, in 2012, two young social entrepreneurs founded Singa to connect refugees with their new communities. And it helps them find employment and engage in social activities to basically integrate more rapidly and deeply into their new communities. Today, they have over 50,000 members around the world, as well as 90 full-time employees across 7 different countries. So before continuing, I'd just like to take a moment to really pin down what exactly a social enterprise is. And so the OECD defines a social enterprise as any entity that trades goods and services to fulfill a social objective and whose main purpose is not the maximization of profit for the owners, but rather its reinvestment for the continued attainment of its social goals. And like any social economy organization, social enterprises distinguish themselves in 2 respects. First of all, their reason of being, which is to primarily address social needs and maximize their social impact. And second, their way of operating, because they implement specific business models, often based on collaboration and typically operating at the local level. Ultimately, social enterprises can be really tricky to define as they operate across many sectors. They use a number of distinct business models, as well as specific legal forms and statuses. And the country differs deeply between different countries and even regions within them, meaning that an organization considered a social enterprise in one country may not be in another. This can make it very challenging to compare data that we have on this, especially for youth-led social enterprises where the data has been relatively scarce. Just to highlight the diversity of areas that they work in, this slide depicts some of the sectors that social enterprise operate in that we've worked with so far. So traditionally, often social enterprises can be associated with work integration for vulnerable or marginalized groups. But today they're really operating across the economy using very, very diverse sets of business models. And so our research here is really designed to provide a source of insight that can help both policymakers and the public understand the potential contributions of youth-led social enterprises, identify the specific challenges that they face, and also importantly, help young social entrepreneurs or would-be young social entrepreneurs identify the necessary support that they might need to get started. And ultimately, this is all with the goal of helping policymakers design policies that really effectively support youth-led social enterprises. And so the first step that we took was looking through existing research on this subject. And one of the big challenges that we found was that, first of all, data between different countries and regions often was difficult to compare because of the varied definitions of social enterprises that many places use. And this is a common challenge for the social economy that we're working to address as a team. Often, because of that, research could often be based on collections of case studies that are useful, but make it difficult to draw inferences on the whole of youth-led social enterprises. And so what we really did here was to try to build on the existing work by creating a survey and conducting extensive interviews with academics, policymakers, as well as young social entrepreneurs. And we've used this to combine an analytical look here with in-depth information and case studies to propose policy recommendations that are applicable across multiple countries. And so as part of this, we ran a relatively small survey for young social entrepreneurs, practitioners, policymakers, and academics to assess their views on youth-led social enterprises and identify common challenges. And overall, we gathered about just under 400 responses from over 75 countries. And though this is a preliminary step, it allows us to draw some key inferences, namely that people do see potential of youth-led social enterprises to address certain key challenges. And I'd just like to highlight that the second two most commonly cited areas were employment opportunities for youth and the development of entrepreneurial and leadership skills for youth, which I think really underscore the synergy between this topic and the objectives of the Youth Guarantee. And again, with respect to this Youth Guarantee, I'll admit that this is not always going to be a silver bullet to create opportunities for youth to get employment, as well as developing their skills. However, it's worth emphasizing that social enterprises can create resilient jobs and they can spur faster recoveries. Following the global financial crisis and the COVID-19 crisis, research indicates that social economy organizations experienced lower levels of job losses, as well as following certain crises, social enterprises and cooperatives help to spur faster and also more inclusive labor market recoveries. The second is that young people can make very important contributions to social enterprises. As I mentioned, they've already taken leading roles introducing innovative business models and technologies. But also we've seen that they're very important to maintaining the system as it is. In some OECD countries, older cohorts of social enterprise leaders and workers are likely to retire in the coming decade. For example, in France, it's estimated that more than 750,000 social enterprise employees are expected to retire by 2028. And these demographic shifts will create opportunities and also an imperative for young people to take leading roles within social enterprises. Another key objective of this research that we were doing was to identify the specific challenges, if there were any, faced by youth-led social enterprises. And what we found is that they face a sort of double bind resulting from the age of their founders, as well as the specific challenges that arise from acting as a social enterprise. And so this is to say that, first of all, social enterprises face specific challenges related to adopting a business model that pursues a double bottom line, that does not prioritize profit as its primary objective. So, similarly, being a young entrepreneur can also, pose specific obstacles related to skills, experience, and also, access to finance related to savings and credit history, among other challenges, which also can create barriers that inhibit a broad range of people from participating in social entrepreneurship. And so ultimately, youth-led social enterprises face a combination of these challenges. And so the challenges resulting from this double bind, particularly access to finance, access to skills, lack of visibility, and challenges navigating legal frameworks, present obstacles to realizing this full potential. So first of all, with access to finance, young social entrepreneurs face both the challenges of, as young people, they're more likely to lack credit history, they're less likely to have developed significant savings, but also they need to follow specific funding paths as social enterprises compared to traditional businesses. It may be harder to access traditional sources of financing, creating, I guess, unique areas where we often see failure due to a lack of access to finance. Similarly, developing skill sets is very important. Even running a business takes a specific skill set, and running a successful social enterprise is yet another one. Where even a social enterprise that's meeting its bottom line is a failed one if it's not achieving its social impact. And so, I guess here the crux of the paper is describing these challenges and identifying how policymakers can help to remedy them. So we've identified four main areas where policymakers can support youth-led social enterprises. So first of all, helping youth develop the knowledge and skills to launch, run, and scale successful social enterprise is very important. And we've seen cases where integrating social entrepreneurship into primary and secondary school career, as we've seen in Korea and Scotland in the United Kingdom, can help young people develop the necessary interest as well as the social and emotional skills needed to engage in social entrepreneurship. This approach especially can also help to further reduce barriers to access for underrepresented groups to social entrepreneurship. Of course, there's also specialized training opportunities that can be integrated into secondary and higher education, which can help young people develop the specific business competencies to engage in social entrepreneurship as well. Second, encouraging private investment and developing tailored funding and financing opportunities for youth-led social enterprises is very important. The funding needs of youth-led social enterprises goes beyond starter grants that are, I guess, the most readily available source of support in this area. It's very important that they are complemented with a mix of other tools such as financial intermediaries, which you've seen in Canada with the Youth Social Innovation Capital Fund, scale-up grants, such as those provided by the Young Social Entrepreneurs Global in Singapore, and also publicly funded loans and loan guarantees, such as those provided by the Social Cup in France. And together with the awareness and knowledge to navigate these measures, we think that youth-led social enterprises can increase and improve their access to finance. Another area that is quite important is actually simply raising the profile of youth-led social enterprises. Some of the data that we've gathered so far indicates that there may be a somewhat of a divergence between the reality that policymakers see and those experienced by young social entrepreneurs today. And so I think that making sure that there are things like awareness raising campaigns, such as the Social Enterprise UK Buy Social campaign, awards and events can help educate both the public and policymakers on both the positive contributions of youth-led social enterprises as well as their specific needs. Giving them a seat at the table is also quite useful. It enables them to share their perspectives and ensure that their needs are considered when policy frameworks are developed. And authorities can engage existing public engagement to involve young social entrepreneurs as a specific target group. And we've seen this in actions in Brazil, and particularly in France, where actually 1/5 of the members of the that were appointed to the National Council of the Social Economy in 2015 were actually young people. And finally, probably one of the more simple recommendations we can make is collecting age disaggregated data on social enterprise ownership and engagement. Regularly collecting accurate data on youth-led social enterprises, as we've seen in Quebec and Canada, as well as Spain, is a really important step towards informing policies that effectively support them, and also enabling more research that can draw stronger conclusions. Of course, one challenge here is that it requires a clear definition and common criteria for social enterprises across governments and between countries, which again we've seen as a regular challenge. And so really to look at this within the policy context in the EU, we can see that there's a lot of synergies between the reinforced youth guarantee, which presents an opportunity to expand the offerings available to young people and ensure that those who are interested in social entrepreneurship have the opportunity to develop the skills and knowledge to do so. And the Social Economy Action Plan, which was adopted in December 2021. And it's quite fortunate to have such a supportive policy environment to look at this. And so I guess for the reinforced youth guarantee, first of all, the mapping element is a very important area. As I mentioned, the quantitative data on youth-led social enterprises remains limited, despite ample research on social enterprises more generally. And identifying the number of young social entrepreneurs, their impact, and available sources of support is absolutely vital to improving the support systems and promoting them in general. Second, outreach is also crucial. One reason that stakeholders may view challenges as more severe and support systems as less adequate is that policymakers policymakers may be less aware of the support available to them. And in this sense, the Social Economy Action Plan will certainly help. Finally, the preparation stage of the guarantee aligns quite well with our activity that the EU is taking elsewhere to set up training opportunities for young people who are or would like to be social entrepreneurs. And so I guess in sum, the need for more opportunities for young people is there. They're clearly facing challenges. Young people are interested in social enterprises and already making contributions to the social economy at large. And despite these challenges, this is a hopeful moment where, especially in the EU, we can see that this is perhaps the right moment to support youth-led social enterprises. And I hope that our upcoming paper can help inform this process. And again, would love to hear all of your perspectives. If you're interested, we have some relevant OECD publications that speak to these issues. The OECD recommendation on the social and solidarity economy helps provide, I guess, international guidance that has been agreed to by OECD member states on how we define certain elements of the social and solidarity economy, how they can be supported by governments, and how we can work to support them in the future as well. Similarly, the OECD recommendation on creating better opportunities for young people provides really comprehensive overviews on specifically what actions governments can take for young people in general. Likewise, we've recently published a policy manual on legal frameworks for social enterprises, which is an extremely tricky area, as well as a team that we work with quite closely at the OECD published a policy brief on access to finance for inclusive and social entrepreneurship, which takes a deep dive into the role that fintech and financial literacy play in access to finance. And with that, thank you very much for your time today, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you also, James. It was a very interesting presentation, mainly because social economy is an instrument of a policy instrument for active labor market inclusion for young people. And maybe we can see this, in most of the Central and Eastern European countries, social economy is seen as a panacea for social inclusion, not also with other perspectives as a way of community development or something like this. It's a narrow definition, let's say. If we have questions for James. Huh? Maria also has a paper on social economy in Portugal, so.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation too, James. I wonder what is the frontier between social enterprises and third sector, the so-called third sector. NGOs, charity organizations are also included in this huge concept, or only private sector is what are you talking about?
Thanks a lot. So we are not talking about the private sector. The way that we're defining social enterprises is that they would fall within the social economy. And so I think you can see a divergence here between how some countries, how many countries would define it as almost any business with a social purpose. Whereas the definition that we're using is a little bit more constrained in terms of how profits can be used, namely that they need to be the number one objective, as well as other criteria that are hopefully implemented, such as more democratic decision-making, reinvestments of profits if they're made, and as well as, I guess, collaborative business models. And so I think this is where, again, we can see that social enterprises should exist safely within the social and solidarity economy, as well as the third sector. And we actually have an upcoming publication that should help clarify some of these concepts by providing a sort of overarching conceptual framework of the social and solidarity economy that still acknowledges the, highly varied traditions and definitions that people use. But I guess, where the third sector, the notion of the third sector is exceptionally strong. You see in Italy, for example, you can see that there are social cooperatives that act as social enterprises would, where they're, pursuing business objectives. They have a viable business model that it doesn't rely on outside funding to sustain itself, but they're still pursuing very specific social objectives that go beyond the interests of their individual members. And I think that that's where you can see the positioning of social enterprises within concepts like the third sector and the social economy. Yeah.
I don't want to take the, I spoke quite a lot already, so, but yeah, we did, so I coordinated some research on entrepreneurship in general, youth entrepreneurship, and I've looked at this quite a bit. The last bit we did was one of the things that came out is that young people, that is up to 25, don't often make good entrepreneurs. And it's you talked about young people as up to 35, and 4 out of 10 are youth-led. I suspect that most of those youth-led social enterprises 25 to 34 or older young people. You need, as you said yourself, one needs a certain amount of experience, one needs a certain amount of skills, one needs a certain amount of, and you need to get access to finance, and that's also a general problem for young people when they try to start a business. So I guess it's easier and maybe, and it's possibly more appropriate that it be older young people who take responsibility, because it is involved with responsibility. 18-year-old starting a new business gets into debt. Should we be promoting that? So yeah, some comment on that, or who amongst these young people we should be. How should we be, or to who?
Yeah, so that was actually something that we talked about quite a bit at the beginning of the study, and I should have mentioned this and forgot. We are defining young people in this case as 29 and younger. But the issue is that a lot of the data out there uses, there's a lot of ways to define young people, it turns out. And so it's, I think, generally below 35, but there's a lot of specific age ranges. Sorry. And so I think the question of who specifically we should be targeting is the young people who are able to develop the necessary skill set that they need to do this. So if we're gonna, integrate social economy concepts and skills into primary and secondary curricula, maybe that age can go down, and maybe young people can develop those skills at an earlier age. Until we get systems like that in place, maybe it's better if they can get training, specialized training like that in higher education, or probably most likely have training opportunities for young people, or at least mentoring opportunities after the out of education systems, depending on where they are. But I think what we have seen is a unique capability of young people, especially who identify key problems in their local situations, in their local environments. And so the ideas on how to find innovative solutions to those challenges are really remarkable. And the challenge, I think, for us here is to find ways to give them the necessary support to help them develop the skills as soon as possible to actualize those ideas and make them work and help their communities.
Now I think it's time, if you want, if you have other comments, questions for Niall or James, please. We have 5 minutes more. Nobody? Okay.
I have a question for James. Thank you for your nice presentation. What do you think about especially 15 and 20 years old young people can start youth-led enterprises, especially in rural areas? This is the obstacle because rural areas have a low level of education. This is the main problem, and poverty problem. What do you think about? Thank you.
I think that's a great question. I mean, again, what we've seen is that young people, no matter the context, are acutely aware of specific challenges that might be present in their community, and regularly coming up with innovative ways to solve them, even very, very specific issues. And I don't have any specific examples of that in rural areas in mind right now, but I think at that younger age, it's really important there that they have access to enabling supportive systems with people who can give them the backing to pursue these ideas without risking, as you said, taking on a lot of debt or something like that, and wasting resources or putting themselves into a tight situation. But again, I think that's where having something that they can go to where they can bring this idea, ideally would help them realize it. And so one of the things that we're doing with this project is creating, I guess, a database where a young person in a given country can say, okay, I have an idea for a social enterprise. What are the resources available to me here that I can go and contact to overcome a specific challenge? And so hopefully, even if those resources don't exist in their specific community, they'll be able to send an email to somebody elsewhere who might be able to give them some guidance on that.
Other questions? If not, I have one for Niall and one for James. I think I have the right, Francisco. Okay. First of all, Niall, you discuss about green economy and green transition, but you presented data on digital transition mostly. Do you consider that NEETs could make, let's say, could have an effect, an impact on green transition? Can they bring their knowledge, or can they be included in this green transition also?
Absolutely. Yeah, I betray my, we cut up the Global Employment Trends for Youth, and I did the chapter on digital and creative, and my colleague did the chapter on green but green, green and the investments in green and particularly transformation of production structure. I mean, it's a bit complex because there's lots of elements to green transformation, but yeah, the green, let's say, in as much as one can compare, because the different investments that we looked at and the different approaches are not really, strictly speaking, comparable in terms of costs and employment gains, but certainly the green and blue, the C related resources, were at least as important, let's say, at least as useful as the digital. I focus on the digital. It's a bit complex, but yes, certainly green is a big way to go, and it's a focus of our efforts on youth employment creation in the ILO. Certainly, that is an area we're very much focusing on, and it's a very fruitful. I mean, young people are also more like, possibly it's true also social enterprises. They're more open to this kind of ideas, and they tend to be more environmentally conscious and so on. And there's but so maybe, yeah, in terms of entrepreneurship, but certainly yes, it's definitely a fruitful. Yeah, so I'll stop there, but yeah, again, I'd refer you to the report. There's a whole chapter on what we can do about green, but yeah, certainly it's a fruitful.
Thank you, Niall. James, from your presentation and also from Niall's, it seems that young people need a lot of skills, good skills, to make entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, and also for digital transition and green transition. What about needs? Needs are not so, did not have so good skills and are not in education, not in employment. How can we include them in social economy? How can social economy contribute to their inclusion?
It's a good question. I would say that one of the things that the social economy, and specifically social enterprises, specializes in is actually integrating people into the labor market who otherwise would not be. And so in the case of social enterprises, you have the famous example of work integration social enterprises. And here, what they do is find ways to accommodate people who have somehow not been able to join the labor market, and provide the kind of jobs and supportive environment that they need to participate in that. And again, they operate across a huge variety of sectors, but I think that potentially finding a ways to connect with NEET youth and really engaging with them to see if they can be brought into these types of programs would be a really conducive way to help, again, bring needs back into the labor market through the social economy.
Let's hope. Sometimes social economy is it's associated with the economy of the poor people, but is not the case, not anymore. We'll see what will happen. Thank you both for your presentations. Thank you for sharing with us your knowledge and your experience. It was a really pleasure to facilitate this workshop and also to find new things. I think also for my colleagues from Cost Action, it was a pleasure to hear your information from your research. I don't know if we don't have no more questions. I think we can have a break before the panel sessions that are, I don't know, we should look each of us for the room that we have. Thank you very much for all.
Hello, Jail. Can you hear us? Perfect. Thank you.
Let's see whether you guys can hear me. Hi there.
Hello. Yeah, we can hear you.
Good. That's perfect. Good.
So let's start. Good afternoon. Welcome back. So we are going to start right now this afternoon session, that is this titled Current Challenges for Youth Employment and Policy Response. And we have two keynote speakers here with us today. Jale Tosun, she is online in this moment, and Michelle Pereno, she's here at my right. So we are going to start with Jale. I say Jale because we have something in common, cultural in common. But for some of you is Jail. Jail Tosun is a professor of political science at the Institute of Political Science at Heidelberg University. She was a research fellow at the Mannheim Center for European Social Research before being at Heidelberg. Her teaching and research focuses mainly on the comparative study of regulation in areas of environment, energy, and climate change, as well as on distributive conflicts within the European Union and the influence of the EU on regulatory measures in third-party states. On behalf of the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, Yale is leading the project Change Through Crisis, Solidarity and Disunity in Germany and Europe. And people at the tracking project, we are very happy to count on her advice as an expert on policy analysis for youth. She serves as an associate editor of prestigious peer-reviewed journals such as Policy Sciences and International Review of Public Policy, and provides advice as an editorial board member to other leading journals in the field of public policy. So Jale, thank you for being here with us, and you have the floor.
Oscar, thank you so much. You see, I'm flushing now because like I'm really like very touched by these kind words and by this very nice introduction. I'm very happy and I feel very privileged to be able to deliver today's keynote. And for that purpose, let me share my screen with you. So in a second, you should be able to see a presentation. And maybe you can briefly confirm whether this is the case.
Yes, we can see.
Wonderful. Yeah, just to be on the safe side. And I will just use these slides to structure my keynote. And I'm very happy to be with you. And Michelle, it's great to have you with us. And of course, all the other friends and colleagues with whom I have collaborated for almost 2 years now. But well, unfortunately, still without having met in person, I'm sure this will change in the not too distant future. But today it's going to be a virtual interaction for another time. And I'm going to talk about youth unemployment in Europe and on policy coordination. And I have lots of things to say about policy coordination, but maybe let's start at the start. So I have a background, and I would also say that my main specialization lies in policies with regard to climate change, energy and environment, and also agriculture, which is why tracked in, but also the youth observatory are of such great interest and value to me. But I started to become interested in youth unemployment and the corresponding policies back in 2012. And I think this statistic here gives you a very good reason for why I started to become interested in this, because that was pretty much the high time of youth unemployment in the European Union. And as you can see, since then, also because of a very important policy measure adopted at the European level, but also national policies, the youth unemployment rates have declined. And then they rose again during the COVID pandemic, which is not too surprising. And currently, if you look at the average rate across all European member states, or you see two lines here, another one is the average over the countries that are members of the Euro area, you see that it's very low. It's certainly much lower than it used to be at the beginning of the measurement. But this doesn't mean that we don't have a problem with youth unemployment. I mean, even though we have like this general development averaged over the European Union, we have countries, the youth unemployment still remains a very important issue. And these countries, and I know that there are quite a few representatives of these countries among our group right now in Brescia, but also following online, know that in some countries, youth unemployment is still a big issue, because you can see Greece is still very much at the top of the statistics, and so is Spain. And Italy, where we're currently having electoral campaigns going on. This is why I actually decided, not only because the conference is physically held in Brescia, but also because the fact that there are elections upcoming in Italy, I thought I should maybe look a little bit more into like how the candidates in Italy currently discuss or youth unemployment, or what attention they pay to this. And it's actually quite interesting to see that despite the fact that there's still a pretty big issue with youth unemployment, that it is not the main issue in the electoral campaign, even though you have many young people asking politicians to take action and to come up with functioning and well-designed policy responses. As I mentioned on the previous slide briefly, what was quite remarkable in 2012-2013 is that for the first time at the European level, a strategy was adopted, and many of you are well familiar actually with that strategy. It's the European Youth Guarantee, which outlines several messages and also prescribed and stipulated several measures to address youth unemployment. And I think one of the first and foremost messages of the whole approach is that for fighting youth unemployment, you cannot just have the state taking action by itself, and neither can the private sector generate youth employment, but that you need to work together. So the whole idea of the European Youth Guarantee, which was then actually reflected in the national implementation strategies, is that you need to adopt a multi-stakeholder or multi-partner approach. And that actually brings me to the topic of today's keynote, which is on coordination. Because coordination effectively means, and I'm going to reflect on this definition of coordination also, that you have multiple units working together on an issue, hopefully with the intention to solve that issue. But if you stick with the term coordination as such, it mostly means that these units simply inform each other about what they're doing. So coordination, in a way, is a necessary condition to go for either cooperation or collaboration. Cooperation is more sophisticated, it's more structured than coordination, because it means that units actually work together, but on few or even just one occasion, whereas collaboration, in terms of its content, is about establishing a more sustained collaboration between different units, between different actors. And even though the title of today's keynote is coordination, I think what we are most interested in eventually is how cooperation or collaboration takes place. But for this to happen, coordination is actually the first step we need to take. So this is already, I think, one point I would like to present to the audience so that we can reflect on that, how we actually understand of coordination, and whether we may perhaps want to go for a slightly different terminology, such as collaboration. And having a background in public policy, there exist many terminologies which actually try to capture the essence of collaboration, and they are called, for example, policy integration. And Oscar generously referred to my activities as an associate editor of Policy Sciences. And from my editorial experience, I can tell you that research has really skyrocketed almost the last 5 years with regard to the topic of coordination, but also policy integration. So we're receiving many submissions where the authors look at institutional arrangements for coordination or collaboration, but we also look at how policies are designed so that the individual parts actually fit with each other and help to solve a complex problem. So this is actually a very timely and very important literature that has emerged within the overarching body of public policy research, but even broader. Policy science is not just public policy, it also includes sociology, for example, even within policy sciences. So this has become a really, really hot topic, which is applied to different types of problems. And one of them, of course, is youth unemployment, but you can replace it with sustainability transition, for example, or climate change governance. When we talk about youth employment policies or measures to fight youth unemployment, there is one literature that is actually extremely insightful, especially also with regard to understanding the idea of coordination. And this is a super, super important book published by Peter Hall and David Soskich. It's called Varieties of Capitalism, which represents a subfield of political science, which, however, is very strongly informed by macroeconomic concepts, and therefore it's pretty much the founding literature or a key literature in a field known as comparative political economy. And this book, or the whole literature on varieties of capitalism, which is extensive and still very, very prolific, looks at how market economies, how capitalist systems function. And the two pure type, which were originally identified by this book, are liberal market economies, where you have a very low degree of coordination. And this is actually the reason why I'm currently referring to the varieties of capitalism concept and the literature, because in there, coordination plays a key role, which may or may not be known to the audience in Brescia or also to our online followers. So the counterpart to this, the other extreme, are coordinated market economies. And here you see also some examples. So you have the United Kingdom and Ireland. These are countries where you have a liberal market economy, where the economy does not rely so much on specifically skilled labor. And therefore, the education system is also much, much more general. So you don't have a vocational education and training system in place in these countries. Whereas if you look at the Nordic states or the continental states, such as Germany, for example, but also Austria, Switzerland, there you see that the economy for its functioning depends very much on skilled labor. These are people who have very, very special skills. You have a highly formalized education system. And in the case of Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, for example, you also have vocational education and training programs where the state cooperates very closely with the private sector to understand what skills are needed and to ensure that the training system actually conveys the skills that are needed. And this is actually the understanding of the political economy literature of coordination. And this is where I have to go back to what I just said a couple of slides ago, that I think if we consult this literature, the understanding or the definition of coordination is much more demanding than what I presented earlier, where coordination would just refer to a situation where units inform each other. Here, it actually means you have to cooperate or even to collaborate. Collaboration, I think, is the best term here, because it means that you have to establish a stable arrangement between different types of actors. Then, because this book was so well received and so influential, additional conceptual work emerged and identified dependent market economies as another subtype, which referred to post-socialist states. And they also identified so-called mixed market economies, to which Portugal, Spain, and Greece belong. as those countries where you see a mix, especially of the liberal elements, but also of the coordinated elements. And here comes in a second important argument made by the comparative political economy literature, which stresses that coordination as such is not sufficient to actually have a stimulating economic system, but that you need to ensure that you have institutional coherence. Right? So you need to make sure that the measures and steps taken by, let's say, the government actors align with the needs of the private actor groups and different types of stakeholders here. And the argument which is made in the literature is that the mixed market economies are problematic to the extent that because of the mix of the different elements, there is a high degree of institutional incoherence. And so there are no complementarities to effectively stimulate economic growth or the solution of any problem that is related to the labor market or to the economy as such. This brings me to another point. I mean, still having this political economy understanding of coordination as not just informing each other about action, but also taking joint action, we can differentiate between two types of coordination. One type is the so-called horizontal coordination, and it refers to different sectoral actors working together. So it can be, for example, the Ministry of Employment collaborating with the Ministry of the Economy and the Finance Ministry, and trying to work out a program that in our case aims at fighting youth unemployment. So they're all at the same level and they're all state actors. But you can also have vertical coordination where you link the activities across different levels of government, where you, for example, have in the German case, the Federal Ministry of Employment cooperating with the local public employment services, right? A collaboration which cuts across these different levels. So you have like these two very basic types of coordination, which are vividly discussed in the literature. So the policy scholars like to talk about horizontal coordination, scholars who do federal studies, for example, but also geographers, human geographers or economic geographers, they really like the vertical coordination, for example. And what are potential outcomes of coordination? As I just mentioned, it's not the literature on political economy is not only interested in coordination or collaboration per se, but it is interested in the quality of the outcomes such constellations produce. And there are three basic types here. One can be that we have a coherent set of policies where the policies that exist simply don't contradict each other. But we can also have a consistent set of policies where the policies adopted actually reinforce each other, or we have policy congruence where the sets of policies work together. So the most sophisticated, the most demanding type here evidently is policy consistency, because that would mean that the individual decision makers, but also the stakeholders are very aware of what they're doing, and that what they're doing has an effect on what others are doing, and that they work together and really try to create a situation where you have an added value. So coordination can refer to how policies are designed. If we look at a set of policies which are typically used to stimulate youth employment, we have active labor market policies, for example, which comprise training, private sector incentives, public employment, but also job search assistance. And ideally, you would like to have an outcome of coordination where at least these individual elements don't contradict each other, or where they don't cancel each other out. In the best of all cases, you would have that they create a value added because of how they are designed. But then coordination also refers to how individual actors collaborate. And for the last few minutes, I will walk you through this research I've done in the past, and which we're happily can continue in the context of track-in. So there are all sorts of stakeholders and actors who are involved in youth employment policies. Here's just a random selection of these actors. And what we ideally would like to have is that they work together, that they know that other actors exist, that they at least talk to each other, but maybe that they even sit down and work out measures that reinforce each other, right? Where they create a value added. And why would this be desirable? Because first of all, one actor may just have a limited competence or capacity to work out an optimal policy design, and therefore collaboration between different partners is useful. And this is also why the European Youth Guarantee actually is very explicit on asking for the establishment of multi-partner or multi-stakeholder arrangements for the implementation of the Youth Guarantee. So what we did here in a paper co-authored with Philip Trein is we looked at the degree to which private actors are involved in such arrangements. And then we also looked at the responsibilities public employment services have. And we came up with this categorization where we identify horizontally centralized systems, like they vary with regard to whether the centralization is high or low. And then we also identify whether the scope of coordination is high or low. And for the interest of time, I think it's sufficient to say that we have two we have two extreme combinations where you have high centralization, also a high scope of coordination, and also the other extreme where both dimensions would have low values. And we tried to put this categorization into empirical research, but before doing that, we formulated an expectation by drawing on the literature that we think, because of the built-in inherent, the built-in complementarities in mixed market economies, that we think that these economies are the ones that are less likely to achieve high degrees of horizontal coordination, but also a relatively low scope of coordination. And we also identified a number of control variables to which I will turn shortly, but here I would like to show you the data which we generated in this context. So this is data from 2019. So this might be a bit dated because also the Youth Guarantee implementation reports, they are updated. But what you see here is that we have quite a few countries that have that fall into two quadrants. The one which is in the this should be the lower left part, at least from my perspective, where you have, for example, the United Kingdom and Denmark, but also Germany. Where we actually have this situation where we have few private actors involved and actually a very weak influence of the public employment service. And then we have the upper, and it should now be the right quadrant, where we also have quite a few countries, where we have, for example, Poland, but also Ireland, and also Portugal falls into this category, where we have a constellation with many private actors involved, but at the same time also very strong influence of the public employment service in terms of steering. And here you see a summary of into which categories which country falls. And Oscar may be puzzled because Spain is not in there. And there's one simple reason why Spain is not in there, because if you look at the Youth Guarantee implementation strategy of Spain, at least this was the case in 2019, it was only the Ministry of Labor which was indicated as the central actor responsible for implementing the Youth Guarantee. And therefore, there were just simply no other partners, right? And therefore we had to exclude Spain from this analysis because according to the official documents by Spain, it is only the ministry. And therefore we could not assess the scope of coordination with regard to which private actors are involved or how many private actors are involved. And we could also not see what the relationship is between private actors and the public employment service, because it's all structured via the ministry. And as you see, this is a quite diverse group, and it also contradicts, at least at first glance, what we have seen previously with regard to the assignment of the countries to the different types of market economies. But once we control for several factors, such as whether these are new member states, what the needs rate was at the time of measurement, also whether the countries receive payments out of the youth guarantee, and also seeing how much these countries have spent on active labor market policies in the past, we actually see that the variable that differentiates mixed market economies from the other ones has a significant and negative effect, actually signaling that, as expected by theory, the fact that these market economies, because of their incomplementarities, have a lower degree of centralization and also lower degree of involving private actors here compared to all the other groups. And as I said, this is a finding which in a way is maybe a bit dated because the data goes back to 2019. But at least on that basis, we could show that the type of the political economy, the overall type of the political economy actually is reflected in how the countries have indicated how they plan to implement the youth guarantee. And so this is a summary of the findings. So being a mixed market economy has important implications for the scope of centralization, but also for the scope to which private actors are involved. What is also important is that there's an effect of, well, if you had previous experience with active labor market policies, countries also go for different arrangements for implementing the youth guarantee. And generally, we can say by looking at the descriptive data that the youth guarantee has actually provided a stimulus for centralizing the governance of youth employment policies, which I would say you could actually consider to be a Europeanization effect. I briefly mentioned that fortunately we can update this research because together with Claudia Petrescu, we are currently working on a database where we also look at public employment services. And what we do there differently compared to what we've done in the past is that we actually adopt a more granular perspective. So we look at rural areas, and this is actually very much substantiated by the statistics. If you take a look at the statistics broken down by regions, you see that even within the countries which I highlighted of having a high youth unemployment rate, you have a lot of regional variation. And therefore, I think it's absolutely worthwhile to look at what's really happening at the regional level, and to have a particular focus on rural areas or peripheral areas. And therefore, I'm so excited to be able to continue this research and to take it for taking it to the next level. And well, if you're interested in that, here's a bit of further reading, but I would leave it at that. I have no clue how much time I've spent, but I guess more than I was supposed to. Thank you so much. And
thank you, Jale.
I look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you. To be on just on time, what we can do is we can proceed with our next speaker. And at the end of the session, we can have a Q&A together, okay? So we are going to proceed with the presentation of Michelle Perelló. She has working on EU policies and funding programs since 2003 and specialized on regional development, research and innovation on education projects. She earned a PhD in industrial engineering, and her research field is social innovation, participatory processes for policy making, co-creation, and citizen science. In 2009, she founded Consulta Europa Projects and innovation with the aim of developing innovation and capacity building projects which could support and foster a development of Canary Islands, which was smart, sustainable, and inclusive. We have seen that Canary Islands are on the top of the list, so you are doing a good job. So Consulta Europa actually acts as a local development organization, connecting and engaging with organizations from the academia, the industry, the policymaking, and the civil society. Consulta Europa has participated and led European projects on these topics, and Michelle will bring us with some results from the Horizon 2020 project that Consulta Europa is leading, called Ruralization. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Oscar. So good afternoon to everybody. As Oscar has said, I will present you some of the results of our Horizon 2020 project Ruralization, whose title is The Opening of Rural Areas to Renew Rural Generations, Jobs and Farms. And I would like to give you some figures about the project. The project started in May 2019 and is a 4-year project funded by the Horizon 2020 program. We have a budget of 6 million euro and we involved 18 partners from 12 different European countries. We have universities, but also other type of NGO and association collaborating with us, as long as companies as Consulta Europa. In few words, I can say that the ruralization focuses on 2 main aspects that could drive the regeneration of rural areas. One aspect are young people, of course, because of population decline and aging of population in rural areas. And the other focus for us is access to land, because so far access to land is really restricted to too few people and few organizations. And we identified access to land as a key element to foster regeneration of rural areas. When we talk about young people, actually, we also talk about 3 types of new generation that we would like to support in coming back to rural areas. And we have divided this new generation into 3 groups. The first groups are newcomers, which are people that come to the countryside from outside the region, so from outside the rural area. Mostly they come from the city to work or do some business there, which is not related to agriculture. So newcomers go to rural areas to start a new life there, but they are not related to farming or agriculture. Then we have a second group, which are new entrants into farming. In this case, indeed, these are people who start a new farm or take over an existing farm from another family. In most cases, they are newcomers, so they are new to rural areas. But sometimes they simply decide to switch business from another type of business into farming. And then we work with a third type of group, which are successor, which are people that take over a farm, basically from their parents or as part of family business. So we have worked, as you will see soon, with these 3 groups in particular. And then as a transversal issue, we address young people. So the perspective is it's quite an easy and logical one. So the idea is that as soon as we manage to create more opportunities for new generation, more young people will move into the rural areas, and this will generate additional and new economic activities. So we will generate a virtuous cycle in the rural areas. What we have done in the project, I mean, the activities that I will share with you today are basically on one side, the foresight analysis and the inventory of dreams of young people in rural area. And then on the other side, the case studies that we have built on the 3 profiles that I just described you. So I start with the foresight analysis and dream inventory. This has been really the objective of one specific work package. And the idea was to firstly identify and assess trends that will affect rural areas in the coming years, then profile rural areas that are destination of the dreams of young people for the future. So rural areas where young people are dreaming to actually live in and build a life there. And then what we have done, we have made an analysis of how the trends and the dream can actually reveal potential for the development of rural areas and how policies should address this potential. So going to the trend analysis, this has been a huge work. We started by considering more than 1,300 trends that we come out through literature review and other type of sources, which was not only research-based. And we have been screening across these trends to get to a selection of trends. These trends has been discussed. So after the first screening, we came out with 195 trends, and then we discussed this with the 20 regional future workshops. This is the way we call it. So workshops in 20 different regions with different stakeholders. So we have put together people and we have said, we have this type of trends. How much do you think this trend is relevant for your region, for the rural area of your regions? So this has been the part of the trend. And then on the other side, we have built an inventory of future dreams of young people. To do this, basically, we have involved through a survey and interviews over 2,000 young people in the 20 different regions which are represented in the projects. And we have asked them about their dreams, what is their expectation for the future, not only in terms of destination, so the place, but also in terms of their livelihood, accommodation, and lifestyle. And this is what we call the dream recipe. So the issue was not only asking young people, what is your dream job, but also what is the type of accommodation that you would like to live in? What is the type of lifestyle that you want to adopt? And then we have also asked them about their obstacles. So what is the obstacle and the challenge that you see with respect to this future that you are imagining? So the results of the first part of the work were the trends. So out of the 195 trends, we came out with 10 mega trends, 20 trends, and 20 weak signals. What is the difference? Basically, mega trends are like big trends that affect somehow all territories, so are less context specific, are more generally. These mega trends might in the future decline and go to become only a trend, and then in a long future become only weak signals. You see here the cards for each trend that we have developed. Actually, on the project website and on the webpage ruraltrends.eu, you can find much more detail for each trend. And you can see here some with which you are for sure familiar, like aging population, climate change, migration patterns, and the sustainability transition. So these are the mega trends that we know somehow will affect all territories in Europe in the next 10 years. Then we have trends which are also important and affect most of the region, but are more context specific than the mega trends. And you see here that we have several, like circular economy, digital economy, the diversification of rural economy, the importance of food tourism or local paradigm, remote work, for instance, rural tourism. So these are trends that we can already observe, and they could become mega trends in the future, or they could decline in importance. So we cannot really know what will happen, but we have at least an idea of how the situation in rural areas, which elements could affect the regeneration of rural areas in the coming years. And then we have weak signals, which are like phenomenon which have been observed in specific regions, but not all of the regions, of course, and that again might evolve into trends in the future. You see here, for instance, community-based action, the eco-villages, the do-it-yourself movement, educational farms, heritage tourism, and so on. Please take into account that all these trends are, we have considered those trends that can affect most rural areas. Yeah, so it's not like generic trends only. So you see here that we have a lot of weak signals. Okay, and we move to the second part. Then you will see we are putting together the trends with the dream inventory to try to provide policy recommendation. As for the dream inventory, basically we have different cases. We have the cases of young people that are willing to live in the city center, young people willing to live in the city area outside the center, or in the suburb in a city area. And then we have, according to our survey, at least 30% of the young people which have been surveyed, which are considering moving to a rural area, which can be a rural area close to a city, or a rural village, or a remote rural area. Yeah. For each dream inventory, as I mentioned before, we have asked young people what is their livelihood recipe, meaning which type of work you will work in or you're considering to choose as a career, which type of accommodation are you envisaging for your future, and what is your lifestyle recipe. So what are the hobbies that you would like to have, and which are also the value that you will somehow you feel attached to. And then we have asked about obstacles. So what are the difficulties that you see might affect your future? And we see that, for instance, in the case of rural village, type of work and jobs that young people with this dream would like to pursue are related to transportation and storage, agriculture, forestry and fishing, trade, repair of a motorcycle, electricity, gas, and air conditioning supply, accommodation and food service activity, and education. There is an economic activity which is common, for instance, to the three types of rural areas that the young people surveyed as in common, which for instance are the services related to waste and water supplies and waste management. And this is, for instance, a sector that would be of interest for all the young people. Then when it comes to the location and the accommodation, most people are looking for an independent house with possibly a yard or a garden. So, and most people are considering refurbishing old houses, renovating old houses and independent houses. When it comes to obstacles, we have seen different types of obstacles, most of which are, of course, related with the job opportunity, the difficulties in getting job opportunities, but not only. So many young people were wondering about the difficulties to create relations with the rest of the society, so to have actually a social self-satisfactory life. So you see here the different profile for these different rural areas. And what we have done basically was to put together the trends with the dream inventory and try to identify for each type of areas that we have addressed. The city areas, we have actually put it all together in one category, but then we have the three different rural areas. So rural areas close to city, rural villages, and remote rural areas. And we have identified which are the top 5 promising trends that we think might affect these different type of areas, which are the top 5 actions that can benefit from these trends, and the actors that should put forward these actions. And we have thought about the actions, not only in general, so to support the dream in general, but to support the different elements of the recipe of this dream. So it was very interesting for me this morning in one parallel session to hear about the importance, for instance, of social capital, because the issue is not only to support young people in finding or creating a job in the rural areas. We need to help them finding the accommodation they are really looking for and being able to build the social life, the personal life that they're aiming to. So in this sense, we have identified top 5 action, top 5 for each type of category. So for the accommodation, for the livelihood, and also for the lifestyle. And we have identified the top 5 actors that could realize those actions. Without going into much detail of each area, all this work is available on the project website, so you can go through it. What we have highlighted is the importance of having a multi-level governance approach in which you have this horizontal integration that Jael was mentioning. So where we have also the involvement of the policy, the public sector, but also the private sector. And we actually aim also to support a vertical integration where the European level is working together with the national and with the local level. And why do we say so? Because as we have seen before, most of the trends are very context specific. So we really need the local policymaker or national policymaker to be able to answer to those trends and react or prevent those trends, but at least to be aligned with their policies to the trend that will affect those specific areas. So main lessons that we have learned from this first part of the work is that there are thousands of developments that affect rural future and rural regeneration. So as I just said, the context is very important. All type of areas are targets for the future dreams of young people. This was for us quite surprising when we made a survey. So we have really people willing to commute to a rural area close to the city, but also to a rural village and also to a remote rural area. So there is really a very alive rural dream across young people, and we need to target these different type of rural areas and support the rural dreams of young people in the different areas. Each type of region has a profile in terms of livelihood, accommodation, lifestyle dream, which makes even more easy to design policies that can address all these aspects, or that can address at least part of those aspects. And yeah, as I just said, the last lesson I think is about the need really to have alignment of policies, both at local and national level, and also of supporting the collaboration with the private sector. Okay, I move to the second part of the work that we have done, which has been building case studies on these three profiles of new generation, which are the newcomers, the new entrants into farming, and successors. We have created 10 case studies for each category, and then we have made a confrontation with less promising practices. So we have taken the good practices and the somehow failure cases, and we have confronted those and made a comparative analysis to make our conclusion. You see here the map of the case studies that we have built. So they were really taken from all the ruralization countries. And basically, without going into detail of the case studies, the conclusion that we have made in our case is that all the three profiles contribute to rural regeneration. So having newcomers, new entrants into farming, and successors contributes to rural regeneration. I'm almost done, thanks. And we need at policy level to really work along all the type of new entrants, and in particular try to support innovative organizational models. So policies so far, both local and national and somehow European, are not really addressing the diversity of doing business and entering in rural areas that young people are already implementing or asking for. So we made some example of policies, concrete actions that we recommend for policymakers, like supporting the establishment of networks to sensitize skilled students on rural jobs, so bring more rural jobs into curricula, supporting multi-actor governance, supporting farm incubators, and so on. So in general, support new organizational model and business model. Also, as policy recommendation, we have included the importance of supporting the adoption of social, technological, and non-technological innovation in the policies, because these are also driving elements for rural regeneration, and also support the transferability of practices. There is a lot of work done so far in Europe, and we need to be able to create ways to transfer the knowledge that we have acquired across the different rural areas in Europe. Very quickly, in 1 minute, we need to know for whom we are making our recommendation. And I think, having worked in many European projects, sometimes this is the element that we are missing. So we create recommendation, but we should be able to fit it into the different policies. For sure, an important one is the long-term vision for rural areas that the Commission has launched, which is organized around 9 different flagships initiatives. And I think we have space to address different of these initiatives. And when we are providing policy recommendation, we really need to be able to make the connection with the initiatives the Commission, for instance, is putting forward. You see here some of the recommendations that I made that we have seen for the work we have been doing in ruralization, but for sure there are others for the work that you are doing. Also, another important recommendation for me is that we all take part to the Rural Pact and try to bring our contribution as stakeholders to the work that the Rural Pact is doing. And then this is a slide we have from the European Commission. We had our review meeting with the European Commission, so they were wondering about the work that we have done and try to provide recommendation. And these were the recommendation for us for ruralization, but I think it was useful to share it with you. So basically they ask us to provide specific recommendation on how to attract and retain young people in rural areas and to think of this vertical integration. So the European Commission is really striving to look to have more synergies between their policies and the member states' policies and the local policies, to highlight the gender dimension, to learn or think or understand how the access to the Common Agriculture Policy Fund can be improved for newcomers, because existing farmers, so actors which are already working in rural areas, know very well how to access these funds, but newcomers apparently are quite excluded so far. And thinking that we have to connect the recommendations with the two main priorities that the Commission has so far with respect to rural areas, which are food security and renewable energy. And my last recommendation is the long-term vision envisaged to propose to have a rural lens to see, to understand, to prove actually the European policies. So each European policy will be asked now to see if they somehow contribute to rural development. And I propose that we all try to support the idea of having a youth lens, so that we make sure that all European policies are actually supporting young people in general, and in particular in rural areas. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, Michelle. It's right now 1 minute to 3. For time feasibility, I think maybe we have 3-4 minutes if someone wants to have a question, but only I would request our keynote speakers to have a brief answer, 30 seconds or something like that, just in case we can give some voice. Any one of you want to say something? I have a question about the two presentations, Jali and Michelle. If not, you can reach them here or by email or jail, right?
Absolutely. Do send me emails, and I will be happy to take your answers.
Thank you so much, and see you around.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So now it's time for coffee break before the session.
Yes. Sorry, I wanted to add one thing. You will see in the program of this afternoon having 2 coffee breaks. One should be now and one should be in like 1 hour and a half. I'm sorry to tell you that actually was a mistake, and the coffee break now is not actually a coffee break, but it's just a space of movement we give you to move from this room to the others. But in 1 hour and a half, the real coffee break will be ready for you. Thank you, and sorry for the inconvenience.
Day, especially finish the day. Yeah. My friends from the Balkans, hello. Well, I think we can you hear me? Yes. So it's up to me for some final remarks of the day. As many of you know, For those that don't know me, I'm Petrescu Simões. I'm the chair of the rural NEET Youth Network. I have a background as a social psychologist, which is where are we standing as a network, as a cost action. And finally, based on that, I would like also to explore a bit what will be for a quick notepad on what might be or what are the conclusions or the main conclusions of today. I would highlight 2 or 3 things. First of all, we heard, for instance, the Niall's presentation in the morning, and certainly in many parallel sessions, we heard about how the transitions from school to work have become more complex, longer. But in Europe, we now have good news. We don't know the uncertainties, what the uncertainties will make to these transitions, but we know that for the past decade, there is a series of indicators that show that there are improvements in the transition from school to work, whether it's related to education, like the rates of early school leaving from education and training. We see a lot of improvement across several countries and EU 27 in general or overall, and the same with youth unemployment. So the trends are in general, positive, even after COVID-19. And as Niall has put it, of course, part of this evolution is related to youth guarantee. Part of it might be related to how states reacted to the situation, to the pandemic situation. But I would say also, and some reports from the Eurofund show that also in the aftermath of COVID-19, that a part of the response came from young people themselves, meaning that there was a significant number of young people during COVID that transited from work to school. They try to improve their competence and their skills. So that must be accounted for. However, there are disparities, and that's why this cost action was created. First of all, because in rural areas and compared especially to urban areas, in general, the rates of rural needs continue to be higher, especially in southern and eastern countries, and there the disparities are quite big. If we collapse this at the subnational or regional level, this is some data for a report for the European Parliament that I'm preparing. And what we see when we compare minimum and maximum by region, we see that disparities are quite big in southern countries and eastern countries, but especially in southern countries. So we have to take into account that there is a territorial gap when it comes to the distribution of needs. And that's clearly the main reason why we organize this action. Of course, we also have to contextualize this in the development trends. We talked very long about digitalization today. And of course, this will affect how young people in rural areas are going to be more or less successful in making their transition to work. Because we know that there are lower digital skills in rural areas. We also know that there are more barriers to access Wi-Fi networks, equipment. There is also a big need of improving public employment service coverages and efficiency. So there are a series of challenges there to be solved so that digitalization is really an add-on for young people and not a barrier, especially for all young people. And of course, when we think about the green transition, rural societies' sustainability is also a big challenge. Of course, we will see that services are concentrated in some areas. We also know that, for instance, farming is upgrading very fast their tools, their digital tools. And we know that new businesses are coming up. And Michelle, for instance, today, when showing their trends in rural areas, did discuss this in more detail. So I won't go into deep. I would just like to highlight also that coordination, collaboration is an issue on the table. And that's something that this network is clearly focused on. We really do want to improve not only our capacity to involve different stakeholders, we also want to be a relevant player in the future. And I will talk in a minute about the future. We must take note that for the past 3, 4, 5 years, rural young people have become a bit more visible in policy agendas. I'm sure that the pandemic also contributed for that. But in any case, the new youth strategy has defined rural youth as a priority for the next years and the years to come. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. And when we talk about Next Generation EU, we also see that one of the 6 pillars of this policy instrument is dedicated to the next generation's pillar 6. So there's a very significant budget to invest across EU countries on what's coming up for the next generation. So that's something that we also have to keep in mind, that this is a priority for countries in terms of the reforms and investments coming up. But until last year, at least, we have to be aware that rural needs were not on the spotlight for academia. And fortunately, our action has done a lot for the past 12 to 18 months to change this situation. And we have contributed with several publications on the situation of rural needs. I'll talk about that in a minute. So all this together, the figures, the trends, the policy making perspective, all of this contributes to create a context for the relevance of our network. Maybe there are some personal reasons also. I also have a rural background. Yes, that's me, I'm 86 or 87. I really needed to change my haircut. So probably I'm trying to deal also with my own memories as a rural boy, but that's something else. So to sum up, at the present moment, our network, for those that don't know the network, and you can explore a bit more on our site, on our website, we are organized around 4 main topics: social networks and social inclusion, formal and non-formal education, employment and employment services, and sustainability and rural needs. We have a 5th working group which focuses on getting everything together and developing a model of how rural needs can be socially included. And this is a bit of our story. So for the past few months, we have published, for instance, 3 special issues, one on youth and mobility in rural areas, which was co-coordinated by Oscar and Slaven, who are here. We had another special issue that was coordinated by Paul and Emre about about policies and programs implementation for rural needs, and also a collection of case studies that was coordinated by Claudia, Petrescu, and Stefan Bozniak. That was also published as a special issue. And there are so many other elements that we have developed, from policy or policy briefs or policy reports to manuals on how to deliver interventions for rural needs. So there's a big diversity of outputs that kind of created our story and our background on how we look at the situation of rural needs. And also some interaction with researchers outside our network. For instance, we have a podcast series which collected a series of contributions from people from many different scientific disciplines who in many ways are researching about young people in Europe. But I'm mostly here to talk about the future. And our future is, it's still a work in progress. So what I'm going to show you today is a first proposal of what we want to develop in the future. Our internal discussions led us to conclude that our focus would be more relevant if we address not only rural needs, but rural youth in general. So our commitment within this cost action is to develop what we call the European Rural Youth Observatory. And our intention is that for the future, we are organized as a research association with a wide scope, I would say. So in general, the vision and mission is to bring together not only researchers, but also third sector representatives, policymakers, youth workers, rural young people, so that we can deliver an association which is research oriented. And for that, and I won't be very detailed on this, but I would say that it is important to share that we already have a draft, a proposal of our status that is now being analyzed by the core group. I hope that soon we will have some contributions from the core group so that we can have a final proposal on this. But clearly, we aim at values such as openness, interdisciplinarity, transparency, independence, ambition, from the network perspective, but also from the role young people's future. Inclusion, diversity, solidarity, or determination are very important values for what we want to achieve in the future. And moving on, the main reason why I'm sharing this with you is that we want to have more people involved. So we have a call open for institutions at this point to be involved. We will have involvement at both the individual level and the institutional level. But the next step is really to gather institutions. For the time being, we already have a nice number of institutions involved. I was just informed that we have one more country and one more institution. So we're 23 institutions and 14 countries involved right now. We have the status, as I said, under review. And probably next month, we will have a first webinar to gather all the institutions that might be interested in participating in this initiative so that we can explain our proposal and formally what is on the table for institutions if they want to be part of this network. So we will have the opportunity to explain and to share with all these institutions how is this going to work. And we hope that after we agree on the terms of how this can be done, in the next grant period, which will start in November until next October, we will start a roadshow involving stakeholders in a more focused way, both at the policy level making, but also involving third sector and young people and young people's representatives. So this is the process. To be more specific, if by any chance you are interested in participating in this network, you can write us. We have all our contacts in the website, and you can write us to express your manifestation of interest, and then we will start a very simple procedure with a letter, and then we will add you to our database and invite you to a meeting. To finish, I would just like to tell you that these are some of the things that are coming up in our network. So we have a series of webinars. They're available online, the ones that we already organized this year, and we will continue this series of webinars this month. We have ongoing mentoring program to support young researchers to develop their own research projects, focusing on all aspects of rural youth social inclusion. And we will certainly have new calls for missions, for conferences, for possibly for national dissemination meetings, meaning that we have some funds reserved for supporting your own work at the individual level, if you have interests and topics that you would like to share at an international level related to rural young people. So before I finish, I would like to thank you very much to the Italian team that organized this meeting, Elena, Adriano, Niall, and everyone here at the Università Cattolica. Thank you for having us here and for organizing this in such a smooth way. Now we now know what is an Italian light lunch. Thank you, Adriano. I would also like to thank all the speakers, the invited speakers that were with us today, Niall, James, Michelle, and Jelle. And of course, all of you that presented and submitted proposals for presenting in this conference. 2 days before we closed the call, we had 22 proposals. 2 days after, we had 70 proposals. It was really good to see the level of involvement of people in this conference. So my deepest acknowledgement to everyone that was involved in this conference. Thank you very much. And of course, now you can think in more pleasant things. Just some suggestions. Thank you. No, but everyone has to be here at 9. 9. You have a first session, 9 or 9:30.